Hello, class. I welcome you all to this session of the FEM development. And in this particular session, we will just a moment. Hmm. In the present session, we will develop the entire theory of, we will apply the entire theory of FEM which has been developed so far on the domain. We will be dividing the domain into a number of parts. That is, we will be illustrating this theory with the help of a number of examples, let's say. In the first example, the uh, we will be considering the entire domain to be of a single element. Then we will divide the domain into two elements and then four elements and so on. This will, apart from applying the theory of finite element method to these elements, these examples will also serve as an example of illustrating the elements how the elemental equations obtained are supposed to be assembled together to have a single stiffness matrix in the global domain. When you apply the FEM theory to elements, you get each element is going to give you a number of equations. Then the next standard step in FEM is that all these equations are now supposed to be uh, combined together. They are supposed to be assembled together in a global stiffness matrix. And the examples are going to illustrate how this process of assembly is going to take place. So in this section we will take the entire domain as one element. It will be seen that when the domain is divided into elements, just a moment, it will be seen that when the domain is divided into elements, we will construct the trial function within this element only and not over the entire domain as this was done in the previous sessions. Therefore, when we are using only one element, the entire element becomes identical with the entire domain, and corresponding trial functions also cover the entire domain. Consequently, the solution in the previous sections, the solutions which we have already um, derived in the previous sections, they can be, all of them can be viewed as a single element solution. In the present, one element solution will again use a polynomial trial function as was done previously, but we will arrange this particular polynomial in an alternate form. If you remember correctly, the form of the polynomial which was used previously has certain coefficients such as a1, a2, a3, etc., depending upon the number of terms. Now, these unknown terms, that is a1, a2, and a3, are simply coefficients in the polynomial. They do not have, apart from this, they do not have any physical significance. So once the FEM solution has been achieved, and supposing if you want to find out the temperature at a particular location, then the value of the x, that is the space coordinate, is supposed to be substituted corresponding to that particular location in the polynomial so that you can find the value of the temperature at this location. So this means that even after the FEM solution has been achieved, you still are supposed to carry out some additional work to find the value of temperature at some particular locations in which you are interested in. Now, this particular polynomial, obviously, this this means that this particular polynomial has some deficiencies. It has some constraints. Now, in today's session, we will slightly modify this polynomial and the unknown terms, that is a1 and a2, for example a1 and a2, are now going to represent the value of the unknown parameter, which might be temperature or displacement, at some specific locations. This process will be illustrated um, for a linear element. A linear element is going to have two unknowns. Therefore, because it happens to be the simplest polynomial used in finite element method, we are going to illustrate this particular process of converting the form of the polynomial with the help of a linear element. Just a moment. Uh, So coming on to the next slide, uh, the domain happens to be one-dimensional in nature. So obviously, one-dimensional domain is going to be represented by a straight line. It has nodes, that is node number 1 and node number 2, located at the ends of the domain, and the corresponding coordinates are xa and xb, while the value of the unknown parameter has been represented as ua and ub. As there are two nodes in the element is known as a linear element, and the unknown, that is u, is governed by a linear expression such as u is equal to mx plus c. In this particular expression, x obviously is the space coordinate, while m and c happen to be the two unknown. This obviously is a popular equation used to represent a straight line. M also represents the slope of the line, the straight line, and the parameter c here represents the value of the intercept on the x-axis. Now, in this particular slide, we are going to change this particular linear expression so that the two parameter, that is m and c, which obviously are unknown, these two parameter are now going to represent the value of the unknown parameter at node number 1 and node number 2. Now this simply is a substitution process. We start with equation number 1 on display, and then substitute the value of x, that is xa, in this particular expression, and correspondingly the value of the unknown is also going to be u1. That this gives you equation number 2. uh, and similarly, when you substitute the value of xb in the expression, we get the corresponding value of equation number 3. Now this means that when equation number 1 is evaluated at two nodal points, that is node number 1 and node number 2, we get equation number 2 and 3. Obviously, these two equations happen to be linear. They are simultaneous equations, and we can obtain the value of m and c from these two expressions, these two equations. Therefore, when you subtract the two equations, you get this expression: u2 minus u1 is equal to m multiplied by xb minus xa. From this expression, you can get the value of m to be as is written in equation number 4, and correspondingly we can substitute the value of m either in equation number 2 or in equation number 3 to get the corresponding value of C, which has been written in equation number 5. Now in the next slide, we simply are going to substitute the value of M and C back into equation number 1 to get the alternate form of the polynomial which we have been talking about. Now coming to the next slide. So these are the three expressions on display. This is the standard form of repeating the equations which I'm going to be using in the presentations. The equations which have been carried forward from the previous slide are going to be written at the top, and they are going to be separated from the rest of the equations in the slide by the help of a dark horizontal line. So the equation of the u and expression for m and c are the three expressions which we have derived earlier. So they have been written at the top, and they have been highlighted, or they have been separated from the rest of the slide by the help of a dark yellow line. So when you substitute the value of m and c in u, you get um, the expression on display, and this expression can be modified slightly so that you have the value of u1 and u2 multiplied by two functions, which is going to give you expression number 6 on display. Now expression number 6 reads u is equal to u1 phi 1 plus u2 phi 2, where u1 and u2 obviously are the two unknowns. They are unknown because their value is not known. But now u1 and u2 represents the value of the unknown at the two nodal locations. So this is the alternate form of the polynomial which we have been talking about. The earlier polynomial which we used was expression of the type u is equal to mx plus c. It was not exactly u is equal to mx plus c, but was something of this particular type. So in this expression also, m and c happen to be two unknowns, but in this expression they represent the slope and the value of intercept. Now this particular expression, that is u is equal to mx plus c, has been modified to a slightly different form. Of course, the number of unknowns remain the same. Earlier they were m and c, now they are u1 and u2. The significance of this particular alternate form is that the two unknowns, that is u1 and u2, represent represent the value of the unknown at the nodal locations itself. So it is much more significant. It is of a much more use compared to the previous polynomial. Now in this particular expression, that is equation number C, phi 1 is going to be equation number 7, and phi 2 is going to be as has been written in equation number 8. Also notice that phi 1 and phi 2, both phi 1 and phi 2, happen to be linear expressions of x. Uh, it is a linear expression because we do not have any uh, powers such as x square or x cube appearing in equation number 7 or 8. Therefore, it happens to be a linear expression in terms of x. Now, coming to the next slide, this is the same equation which has been repeated from the previous slides. These phi's are known as shape functions. They are also known as the interpolation functions. Note that both phi1 and phi2 are linear expressions of x only. They are linear expressions of x because we started with the polynomial y is equal to mx plus c to get this particular alternate form which is written in equation number 1. Now, excuse me. Now, just for the sake of discussion, if instead of this particular element, instead of a two-noded element, if we did all these derivations for a three-noded element, then we are going to use a polynomial which happens to be of a quadratic type. By quadratic expression, I mean expression such as y is equal to mx square plus nx plus c is a quadratic expression. It has three unknowns, that is m, n, and c, and the quadratic element has three nodes. Two of the nodes are obviously going to be at the end of the domain, and the third node is supposed to be located somewhere in the middle of the domain. Now there happen to be some rules, there happen to be some guidelines with the help of which you can exactly locate a range within which the third node is supposed to be located in the domain. You cannot really locate the third domain at any position which you desire. There is a set of rules which is going to govern the location of the third node. But this obviously we are going to study somewhere in the future classes. Now coming back to the slide on display, we have the expressions of phi1 and phi2, and they obviously are known as the interpolation functions. Now the term interpolation function has obviously it is nothing new to you. You have used the process of interpolation at in some other subjects also. Some other subjects such as thermodynamics, where you have studied where you have used the steam tables. In steam tables, you have properties of steam which has been tabulated at let's say at different values of pressure. So if you want to find the value of enthalpy at a pressure which is lying between the two tabulated values, obviously you interpolate it. So uh, this is from where the term interpolation has been taken. Now coming to the next slide, we are where we are going to discuss some properties of these shape functions. If these properties of shape functions are clear to you, then the thing is that you can derive the shape functions of any element. And that particular element may be one dimension, it may be two dimensional, or it may be even three dimensional. Apart from this, it could be a linear element, it could be a quadratic element, it could be a cubic element, and so on. You can derive very easily derive the expressions of shape functions using some simple guidelines. So for this, we need to understand the properties or the requirements of the shape functions, which we are going to illustrate in the next slide. These shape functions satisfy some properties which have been illustrated in a tabular manner. Phi1 and phi2 happens to be the two shape functions. The values of these two shape functions have been given at locations xa and xb. Uh, the shape function number 1, which is associated with node 1 located at xa. The shape function number 1 at xa has a value 1, and shape function number 1 has a value of 0 at the second node, which is located at xb. So you can very well say that shape function number 1 is clubbed with node number 1, and similarly shape function number 2 is clubbed with node number 2. Both the shape functions have a value 1 at their own nodes, and they have a value 0 at the other node. In fact, this happens to be one of the properties which every shape function is supposed to satisfy. If supposing we have a element which has three nodes, node number 1, node number 2, and node number 3, obviously there are going to be three shape functions, phi 1, phi 2, and phi 3. Phi 1 is going to be linked with shape function number 1, phi 2 is going to be linked with shape function number 2, and phi 3, sorry, phi 1 is going to be linked with node number 1, phi 2 is going to be linked with node number 2, and phi 3 is going to be linked with node number 3. And phi 1 is going to have a value 1 at node 1 itself, and it is going to have a value 0 at node 2 and node 3. Similarly, phi 2 is going to have a value 1 at node number 2, and it is going to have a value 0 at node 1 and node 2. Similarly, coming to phi 3 now, phi 3 is going to have a value 1 at node number 3, and it is going to have a 0 value at node number 1 and node number 2. So this basically is illustrated in a tabular form for a linear element on the display, and this particular table is also known as the truth table. Now when we plot the um, expressions, when we plot the values of phi 1 and phi 2 over the domain, they are going to have a figure of something like they are going to obviously have a linear behavior. So the value of phi 1 is 1 at xa, it has a value 0 at xb, and between these 2 points xa and xb, since phi 1 varies linearly, so these 2 points have been connected with a straight line. Similar behavior has been plotted for shape function number 2. Phi 2 has a value 1 at xb, it has a value 0 at xa, and in between these two values, since phi 2 varies linearly, therefore these 2 points have been connected with a straight line. Note that the value of shape function is 1 at its own node and is 0 at the other node. Now with the help of this particular truth table, we can derive some thumb rules with the help of which we can derive the shape functions of any element. This is going to be discussed in the next slide. The shape functions can easily be created using the truth table. So we are deriving the shape function of node number 1 first. Phi 1 is supposed to be 0 at xb. Therefore, expression of phi 1 is going to be x minus xb. Obviously, this particular expression is 0 at xb. Therefore, the expression of phi 1 is going to be x minus xb. But the thing is that when you evaluate the expression of phi 1 at xa, we get phi 1 to be xa minus xb, which obviously is not 1. But it was desired that the value of phi 1 is supposed to be 1 at this location. Therefore, what we do is we simply divide the two, that is phi 1 is equal to x minus xb divided by xa minus xb, to get the required expression of phi 1. Phi 1 is going to be 0 at xb also. That is when you substitute the value of xa in place of x. So phi 1 is going to be 0 for 0 at xb, and it is going to be 1 at location xa, because in that at this particular location the what shall I say, the numerator and the denominator becomes the same value. So uh, phi 1 is going to be 0 at 1 at x a. Similarly, we can derive the expression of phi b, phi 2. Phi 2 is supposed to be 0 at x a. Phi 2 is supposed to be 0 at x a. Therefore, you get the expression x minus x a, because this is 0 at x a. And when you evaluate this expression at x b, what you get is phi 2 is equal to xb minus xa, which obviously is not 1. Therefore, the last step is simply to divide x minus xa by xb minus xa, which is the required expression for shape function number 2. So this is how you evaluate the expressions of the shape functions phi 1 and phi 2. And if this particular process is clear to you, you can derive the shape functions of any element uh, which might be having any number of nodes very easily. All you are supposed to do is to start with a truth table, something of this sort, which has been done for the linear element, which is on display. Now, since as the stiffness terms, now what we are going to do is the two shape functions which have been derived just now, they are going to be substituted in the stiffness matrix for the linear element which we have derived previously. And since the stiffness matrix consists of terms which happen to be derivative of shape functions, we require the derivatives of these two shape functions phi 1 and phi 2 also. As the stiffness terms need the derivatives of trial functions, we take the derivative of the shape functions also. This gives d phi 1 by dx is equal to minus 1 divided by xv minus xa as the derivative of shape function number 1, and corresponding 1 minus xb minus xa to be the derivative of shape function number 2. Now in both the expression, that is both the expressions of the derivatives, you have a term such as xb minus xa in the denominator. And obviously xb minus xa represents the length of the element, or in this particular case, length of the domain itself, which let's say is capital L. So in the denominator of both the expressions, we have a term representing the length of the element, which obviously means that the derivative of the shape function is a constant quantity. The derivative of the shape function number 1 is minus 1 by L, and the corresponding derivative of shape function number 2 is 1 by L, which obviously is a constant quantity. Now, this is obvious also, because phi 1 was a linear expression of x, so was phi 2. So when you differentiate phi 1 with respect to x, what you get is a constant quantity. Now, since the derivative happens to be a constant quantity, it obviously means that it is going to have a same value throughout the entire length of the element itself. It is going to have a same value throughout the entire length of the element. Now, this is a important observation. It has some practical significance also, and it is going to be seen in future classes that when you take a quadratic element, that is when you have an element containing three nodes, you are also going to have three shape functions given by phi 1, phi 2 and phi 3. And since in this particular case, phi 1, phi 2, phi 3 are going to be quadratic expressions of x, that means they are going to contain terms uh, such as x square. And when you are going to derive this particular expression of phi 1, phi 2 and phi 3, what you're going to get is d phi 1 by dx to be functions of x, which basically means that the value of the derivative is not going to be a constant quantity. It is going to vary as x is varying. Uh, this is going to create some complexities, and the exact nature of the complexities is going to be discussed in the future classes. I just wanted to bring these things in your notice as we are doing the development of the linear element. So we have at the for the time being the expressions of d phi 1 by dx and d phi 2 by dx on the display. Now substituting these two derivatives, we get equation number 1 as the terms of the stiffness function, and equation number 2 as the ith term of the forcing function, which is going to appear in the on the um, right hand side. So we have equation number 1 and equation number 2, and in equation number 3, the um, the term which appears the second term which appears in the right hand side of equation number 2, that obviously represents a boundary term because it has to be evaluated at 2 points given by xa and xb. So this particular term is a boundary term. It has been split into two independent terms. So in equation number 3, we have three terms. First term is a load term which is supposed to be integrated over the domain of the element, while the second and the third term are the values of flux multiplied by phi I, of course, where that is supposed to be evaluated at um, xa and xb. Now, one of these two terms is obviously given to you in form of a boundary condition for the problem which we are discussing at the moment. We have specified the value of flux at xb, and obviously phi I is also known at point xb. When I is 1, we have phi I. Its value is known at xb. Obviously, it is 0. When I is 2, we have phi 2. Its value is also known at the point xb, which happens to be 1. So for both phi 1 and phi 2, we know the value of phi. So obviously, this means that the second term in the in equation number 3 is known at xb for both I is equal to 1 and I is equal to 2. But the third term, that is that which contains the value of the flux at xa, obviously is not known. We know the value of phi 1 and phi 2 at xa, but we do not know the value of the flux at xa. Therefore, this particular term is unknown to us. Now, keeping these two equations in a matrix form, the equation becomes, and in this particular equation, when we substitute the value of xa and xb and the value of flux, we get the resulting equation, which is equation number 1 on display, and in this particular equation we substitute the value of flux at x is equal to 2, that is point xb, as half, because the value of flux was given as half at 1 sorry 1 by 2 at this particular location. So when you apply the FEM technique to a linear element, you get two equations. Obviously there are two unknowns, so for getting the value of two unknowns you require two equations. But in this particular equation, in these two equations, you will notice that the value of the flux at x is equal to x1 is not known in the first equation, but all the terms in the second equation are known to you. All the terms appearing in the right hand side of the second equation are known to you. So obviously you can use the second equation to get a solution, but you cannot use the first equation to get the solution. So for this thing, you use the second boundary condition which was prescribed to you. So the second boundary condition was the value of u itself at xa, and it was 2. Therefore, this particular constrained boundary condition is going to be used to evaluate the uh, value of one of the unknowns. Now, now please notice that um, please notice the difference according to which the two boundary conditions are going to be applied to the elemental equations. In the boundary condition of flux, the value of the boundary condition of flux was directly substituted in the elemental equations, because the term of boundary because a term of flux was appearing in the equation itself. But the other boundary condition, that is the value of the unknown itself, we do not have any term in which this particular boundary condition can be substituted. Therefore, this boundary condition is going to be applied to the trial function itself. The trial function is u is equal to u151. In this case, it is u is equal to a151 plus a252, where a1 and a2 now represents the value of the unknown parameter at the nodes. So when this expression is evaluated at x is equal to 1, this gives us at x is equal to 1, obviously phi1 is equal to 1 and phi2 is equal to 0. So this gives us the value of a1 to be 2, and this value of a1 is going to be substituted in the second equation uh, to get the corresponding value of a2. So once you get the value of a2, which comes out to be 1.409, you can substitute this value of a2 in the trial function to get the corresponding solution of the polynomial over the entire domain. And then obviously this equation of the approximate solution can be differentiated now to get the corresponding value of flux, that is tau is equal to 0.591 x. Do remember that the flux has not been defined as du by dx. The flux has been defined as du by dx multiplied by x itself. So you can differentiate the expression of u, that is going to give you 0.591, and this has to be multiplied by x once again, not x, it has to be multiplied by minus x. So that gives you the flux to be 0.591. Now, in the future slide, we are going to divide the entire domain into two equations, and we will see how the elemental equations which we have developed in the current session are going to be used, are going to be of use to develop the elemental equations when the entire domain has been divided into uh, two elements. So this is all for the time being. Let me just stop the recording at the moment.